was constantly persecuted. I was constantly verbally and physically harassed and assaulted. I've had several instances that I was almost put to death.
There's nobody who, when I started transitioning, who could tell me, oh, this is what to do, this is how to do, this is where to go to. We have the resources. And if you're being discriminated against, who do you run to? Who do you tell? You're at the mercy of the people.
I didn't have a home. No job, of course. I couldn't work. Didn't know where my next meal was going to come from, or how I was going to survive.
I want to be visible in a space where visibility is frowned upon. I want to speak to other individuals that are queer like me, that they don't see themselves in any space, whether it's literature or in movies, and be that person that they see.
My name is Uchechukwu Onwa Valentine, and I work as a co-director of Queer Detainee Empowerment Project. My passion for the LGBTQ community actually led me to the work that I'm doing right now. When I was growing up as a child, at the age of 14 years, my best friend was raped, my childhood friend. He was raped by 4 guys. He was raped because he was effeminate. He was perceived to be effeminate, right? So as a result of the rape, a few months after that, he tested HIV positive. And then a few days after finding out his result, he committed suicide. That was a time that in my life, I felt like there's nobody to even talk to, as a gay boy. So I wanted to stay safe, right? I wanted to advocate for people that are like my friend. So that was how I actually got involved with, finding organizations that would advocate for people that are like my friends or like me, and then got engaged into working with LGBTQ folks. I started as a volunteer before I was hired to work as a full-time staff. I left Nigeria, my home country, because of the persecution that I faced as an advocate. That work that I did put me at risk. I was constantly persecuted. I was constantly verbally and physically harassed and assaulted. Like many may know, there is a law in my home country that criminalizes the LGBTQ folks and pose 14 years prison terms to anyone that is found guilty of identifying as LGBTQ family, and also 10 years prison ban to anyone that supports the LGBTQ folks. So being the fact that I was advocating for the community, so constantly that became like a threat. I've had several instances that I was almost put to death. So for me to continue working, my safety is very important, right? So I need to stay safe, to even advocate for other folks. So that's actually the main reason I had to leave the country, just for me to be safe. So my expectation was like, oh my God, I'm going to go to America, right? I'm going to be free at last. I'm going to, be able to at least love whoever I wish to love. I'm going to be free to be able to do the work that I've always loved to do. Back home in Africa, we only see the good part of America, so we never see the bad part, right? So like we see all these beautiful streets, beautiful cities, pictures and all that. So like I had all these expectations. What happened the day I arrived in the US? I was waiting to see what the future would hold. I was also waiting to see what's going to be the end. My final destination was supposed to be Chicago, but I had to connect through Atlanta to Chicago. So on my arrival to Atlanta, I was stopped by the police. I was stopped by immigration officers. They want to verify why I was coming to the US. I gave them the letter of invitation I had for this conference, right? So they had to call the conference to find out if there is actual conference happening. The person that answered the call told them that there was no conference happening at the hotel. So with that, they said I have no reason of coming to the US. And because of that, they had to send me back to my home country, and deportation is 5 to 10 years ban. So I had to declare asylum, and the next thing I was sent to immigration detention. I remember the experience. I arrived at Atlanta like 5 a.m. I was first put in prison at the airport. I was there for almost 12 hours before I was finally taken to detention. When I was taken to detention, I was chained. My hands were chained to my waist. My legs were chained. My mouth and my nose was covered. That was like the first horrific experience and the emotional experience that I had in the US, and those weren't the things that I expected. I remember leaving the airport with the police officers, about 4 hefty officers escorting me, a young black man from Africa. People were taking pictures and videos of me at the airport. I was so ashamed of myself. So I spent 3 months inside the detention center. The experience I had there is something that I'm not, going to talk about, because the experience was really emotional for me. And whenever I talk about it, or whenever I remember all the things that happened to me in detention centers, at the point I almost died. I was constantly sick. There were no medical attention. I would complain for medication. I would not get it. I would get it maybe after a few days. I also remembered being seriously ill and were taken to a hospital by the officers. I was also handcuffed. I was chained on my legs, I was chained on my waist and my hands. This is someone that is sick. Why do I have to be chained to be taken to hospital? Even while I was in hospital, lying on the hospital bed, my hands and my legs were chained on the bed. These are things that I did not experience in my home country. For me, being sick, being in a hospital, having to chain me on the bed. At that moment, what was going to my head is, I want to sign my deportation and go back, because this is too much for me to handle. I want to be here because I want to be free.
My name is Noni Salma. I'm a writer, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm currently an MFA candidate at the Vermont College of Fine Arts, where I'm studying writing and publishing. I do feel comfortable because first and foremost, I do live in a society where I have complete to a large degree autonomy of who I am, and that I can be myself, and it is also possible for me to find my tribe. Those things make me feel comfortable. I immigrated to the US. When did I officially migrate? I migrated, I think it was 2014 officially. I decided to stay because I think that I knew that I wasn't safe back home anymore. Second of all, I knew that the country, not that it had ever been welcoming for people like me, being a trans person, but it just had gotten to a point where people were more overt with their bigotry in whether it's homophobia, transphobia, or religious bigotry, that people had gotten to a point where they become more overt with it, and that and there were things that were happening, people were getting attacked. I was having issues with family, for me there was no home for me anymore. And it was at that point that I just knew that I couldn't go back, because it just there wasn't any home for me. I would have to maybe move to a different state and be a completely different person and create a home from which maybe is what I did here, right? But the only difference is that there's a community here. I can find my tribe. There are people who have passed through the same experiences with me, and because of that, I can lean on their strength and they can show me the way. We have that here. We don't have that back home. There's nobody who, when I started transitioning, who could tell me, oh, this is what to do, this is how to do, this is where to go to. We have the resources. And if you're being discriminated against, who do you run to? Who do you tell if you're back home? You know, you're at the mercy of the people. And it was also the quality of life for me as a trans person. I had to be realistic with myself. Like, you know, what would happen to me if I died? How would they bury me? Do I have a choice in how I would be buried? You know, these are things that like someone who's cis might not think about, but as a trans person, because you're always reading all these articles about a trans person that died and their family, you know, disrespected them by burying them how they wanted to bury them. I migrated to be safe. I think that's the part of all this ranting that I'm doing. It's just to be safe. It's just to be respected. Do I feel safe? It's funny because I feel like the last 2 years since the new administration, it kind of like, it's been jarring for me as a trans person, as an immigrant, and seeing a lot of rollbacks. You know, like a part of me just sometimes I'm like, oh my God. When I think back of being in Nigeria, I think of just being stifled. Think of being stifled. I think of dancing to the tunes of people. I think of being very confined to people's rules and ideas. Don't do this, don't do that, you can't do this, this is right, this is wrong. People are going to look, people are going to be uncomfortable. That's always at the back of my head. So yeah, when I think of that, I just think of a different me, you know, me that, you know, I didn't have a voice because I was doing what I thought, you know, like you had a box that you had to like circle yourself around, and you couldn't go outside that box. And so that's what I think of. I just think of being caged, right? I think of family, being around family. I think of not wanting to disappoint them, trying to be good, be perfect, get good grades in school, stay out of trouble. Yeah, protecting the family image, protecting the family name. I do feel traumatized by the experiences I had in Nigeria. I feel like the violence that I've experienced, doing a lot of writing, right? Writing my memoir, for me, like, it has dug up a lot of memories that I didn't even like think that I remembered. So it's like all of those things, like they're traumas that, like, and all these things are not just coming out of nowhere. My memory stored them. There's no other option. I cannot, you know, the other options was trying to be this other person, you know, back home. That just never worked. It just never worked because I was punishing myself, right? And I'm talking about like pre-transition, I was punishing myself. I was trying, you know, when you eat like stuff that's not good for your body, but you have no choice and you eat it and your body just punishes you and punishes you and punishes you. And the moment you have access to something that feels good eating it and does good for your body, how do you go back to the thing that you know that you struggled even putting in your mouth? I mean, I'm sure we all have a form of discrimination in our lives. We all have a form of where we are a minority, so to say. But sometimes I'm just like, how would it be perfect if I came to this world and I was not at the bottom of 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 the food chain? Like, how would that freaking feel? Because it is fucking exhausting. I'm not gonna lie to you. You think I don't know that the world is not made for people like me? Sometimes I walk into a room and I know that I'm not supposed to be here.
My name is Vasilis Chukwunonso Onwuaduegbo. I am Nigerian. I am a writer, I'm an artist, and I'm a member of the queer community. I came to the US about 6 years ago when I was 17. And I came here like as a student, but I came here with my parents, and so it was a very kind of like, it was nearly seamless. So I came here at the airport, I got my like green card and I went to my dad's house. And since then I've been in the US with like certain moments when I traveled abroad for school, but I've been here. My relationship with queerness is it's complicated, like it is for everybody. And I went to high school in Lagos in Nigeria, and that was the first time I actually had like a gay experience when I was in boarding school. I was in boarding school. There were many, it was same sex, so there were many guys around, and we just ended up whenever we're like bored or a bit horny or whatever, stuff would just happen. And so that was kind of like my introduction to like what queerness is or gayness is. And but then definitely when I got to the US, that was when I actively started to identify as someone that is part of this community, as someone that is gay. Because in Nigeria, it's not, even though you act in ways that are seen as gay or queer, you don't identify strongly with it because it's like that room for identification is not given. And so it was when I got to the US and I was in college and I was like having some real struggles with like love and with my parents and with religion, that I realized that for me to actually claim what was my potential in this world, I needed to be free. I needed to be open about my identity with myself and with people around me. And that was when I actually kind of like jumped out of the closet. But growing up in the diaspora is not also very easy as people make it seem. It's like people think, oh, growing up in the diaspora is like you have this like silver spoon up your ass or whatever, and it's like no, it's like very much we were in little Nigeria in our home. So we lived in the US, but then you come to your home or you go to your churches and you're very much in Nigeria. The sentiment is still the same, like very homophobic, very gendered, very sexist in those ways. And a lot of times it felt like I was just in a trap. And it was like it ended up being like you live in this country where there's this freedom, but then it becomes like a mirage. It becomes like an illusion because you know that you go home and you go to your churches and you're very much expected to act in a certain type of way. But then you step out and you go to school or you go to the supermarket and you see people acting in different ways, and you're like oh, this is like, oh, I can see what life could be like for me, but it's not I can't access it. It's like you're in a prison, and it felt like a prison in many ways. For me, love has been interesting because it started off with very kind of from a parental place where it's like I love my parents and I love my siblings, and that was a very familial kind of like I love my family. And then because of love of my family, I didn't want to be out. I didn't want to be gay. I just wanted to love them and like make them as proud of me as possible. So it was always like, oh, I'm going to study hard. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be in these spaces and like be the best child can be. And then I realized, oh, I was dying. And that's also when I realized that love itself is a very funny thing, because you can love someone and actually like be, that love could be like a poison and that's actually killing you. And so when I stepped out of that parental love, I started to like look for it in other people, and that's when I got into this whole phase that I was like, it was just like, oh, I was looking for men and looking for sex. It was just like a very interesting time in my life where I was doing ridiculous stuff, and I'm like, I think about it now, I'm just like, wow. If I could go back and tell my younger self in Nigeria any kind of like give them a piece of advice, I'll probably tell them to continue learning about themselves and learning about their bodies, and also kind of like trusting their instincts and trusting that they have value. One of the biggest things that I've started to learn this past couple of years is that I know my body, I know who I am, and a lot of the times when I've run into like dilemmas of identity, it's not because I don't know who I am, it's because I've tried to match it with what the other people feel like I need to be. And in Nigeria, it's a kind of like we need to kind of like get to a place where people are free to be themselves, but we're not there yet. So I wouldn't tell them to like, oh, go out, walk down the street in high heels or whatever. But I'll tell them to explore. Okay, maybe in their bedroom they should like do what they need to do to make themselves like know what they like for themselves. You know what I'm saying? If it's, oh, you put nail polish on, clear nail polish on, and that's what you need to do it. If you need to get a dildo and just like figure out what that means for your body, do it. It's kind of like, it's just like actively just like learning every day, because you don't just like, I've been saying that like this 2020 is a year of like my butterfly year, where it's like I kind of broke out of a cocoon, but that cocoon, if you're a caterpillar and you are in a cocoon, building that cocoon takes a minute. being that cocoon and transforming to that butterfly takes a minute. It's like it's not just one, you're this person and then you become fabulous and whatever, and the next day there's a transition period that happens.
My name is Oliver Anene. I am from Nigeria. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and I grew up in Calabar in the south and lived most of my adult years in Abuja, Nigeria, before relocating here to the US. I consider myself an LGBT advocate. I've been doing that work for most of my life. Back in Nigeria, when I was probably just 18 years old, I got involved in the very first LGBT-focused organization, and we did a lot of LGBT health work, promoting condoms access, education around HIV and sexually transmitted infections, and ultimately you can't do that work without doing policy advocacy and creating spaces for LGBTQ people, particularly gay men and other men who have sex with men, to be able to access these services. So I got involved in policy advocacy from there and continue to do this work, creating space for other queer people across the country to be able to connect, build community, and access services. I had to go back to my hometown in Calabar and set up a community center. So some of the people that I've connected with and supported and helped are scattered across the globe now. And it's amazing, to see a lot of young people thrive and find their own ways. When I moved here in 2012, I also came with a handful of other people who were part of the organization that I worked with. Before I came, I was already getting death threats. I was getting harassed and blackmailed by some people that I know personally, and sometimes even random folks that I didn't know. And with all the harassment and violence and everything that I was experiencing back in Nigeria, I took an opportunity to explore what asylum was like, which, I reached out to some people, Immigration Equality. They had someone interview me and they took my case, and I was one of the lucky few that got my asylum in 3 months after the application. But it wasn't easy. Those 3 months were not something I would relieve or I would wish on anybody else. In those 3 months of being here in New York, because I had to come to New York for Immigration Equality to handle my case, I didn't have a home. No job, of course. I couldn't work. I didn't know where my next meal was going to come from, or how I was going to survive. It was really difficult. I went through the stage where I offered myself to someone in exchange for shelter. Things got really bad and I moved to a shelter, a homeless shelter. A homeless shelter in New York is like a prison, and you're there with all sorts and all kinds of people, and it was really, really terrifying. There were moments where I actually spoke with friends in the UK who said, listen, you can come here, at least you would have you have a roof over your head and you would have food. So I really considered moving to the UK at the time because it was really terrifying. So being here without a job, without knowing what the future held, it was really terrifying. And being someone that, dare I say, was somewhat comfortable back in Nigeria, I was doing a lot of evaluation of my life. Like, is this worth it? Why am I let myself suffer and go through all of this? Especially considering what I'd left behind, including my family, my job, the people that I felt like I was abandoning too.
If I had the opportunity to speak to people in Nigeria about who I am, I would tell them that I represent part of Nigeria that works. There's a part of me that, wants to always be a better person than I am, which, sometimes can be negative because then I'm like my own worst critic. But I think that, I benefited a lot from being born in a family of a father who's very be educated, and even now that my father has not been in my life for so many years, I still want to do that for myself, not because I want to. I have no one that would impress. Who am I going to, my family is not in my life, so who am I trying to impress? I'm doing it just for myself because I want to be better. So I would say to them that, even though I do struggle with, like, I do identify as a Nigerian, but I do struggle. I don't know why. I feel like I have to, something I say I have to work on, but I do struggle with being a Nigerian. I do struggle with it. And maybe I'll tell them that too. And I'll tell them that, you know, it would be nice if we realize that we are alienating a lot of our own. There are a lot of brilliant minds that they're losing because of their bigotry. That we're not going to be a great country by we all being the same. That we should acknowledge the beauty in our differences.
For me, it's about being a voice. If I'm to tell my 15 years old self, something I would tell myself that I am beautiful, I am loved. Several times I've been told that I don't belong here, right? Even growing up as a kid, I've been told that several times that I am different. So I would tell my 15-year-old self that I belong here and I have every right to be here and that I'm beautiful, right? And I have every right to love whoever I choose to love.
When I moved to the US, I was giving up the fight. I was going to focus on me, which is a thing a lot of activists say and need. Since I've been here, I've always been sucked back into the fight. And there's a quote that is going to stick with me because it's very, very real. And it reminds me to keep going. It's a saying that goes, if we're not hungry for justice, it's probably because we're full for privilege. It's just being mindful of that and saying, okay, I can't give this fight up because even though I am in a safer space now, there's so many others who are not, and we need justice for everyone and equality for everyone.
We migrated to the US in hopes of finding a better life and living in a more inclusive society. You chased us, you rebuked us with strong words. Now you return to shame us for surviving the trauma you put us through. How dare you have the guts to challenge us for living with the scars you left us with? How dare you?